the checkered flag. Herb Thomas wins his third Southern 500.
At the pole position, inside front row, Cotton Owens. Here comes Owens.
Buck Baker wheels his Dodge number 3 to the winner's circle where he's been twice before.
When people think of them, they think of them as a pair. But Leonard was the mechanic.
Rusty Wallace has become the Winston Cup champion.
Hello and welcome in to this NASCAR Hall of Fame special. I'm Adam Alexander. Darrell Waltrip, Kyle Petty, and Kenny Wallace will all be here tonight to add reflection on the class of 2013. You probably know by now, Buck Baker, Rusty Wallace, Herb Thomas, Leonard Wood, and Cotton Owens will have their names called at this year's ceremony, joining the best all time when it comes to contributions made to NASCAR. We begin with Everett Cotton Owens, a man who made a name for himself both on track as a driver and off track as an owner. Like so many others that were around in the early days of the sport, Cotton had to roll up his sleeves and achieve success the old-fashioned way.
Everett Owens, known to many for his white hair as Cotton. Born in 1924 and raised in rural Spartanburg, South Carolina. A man who in life put family first and racing a close second.
Somewhere around 1940 is when I saw the first race right here in Spartanburg. I had to get off of work to come up there and still climb the tree to see it.
Owens joins Bud Moore and David Pearson as lifelong hometown best friends in the NASCAR Hall of Fame. Three men responsible for uncovering so much of a sport's history.
The first time I met Cotton was back in about 1941. We turned out to be real good friends.
When he and my mother started dating, her parents talked about how crazy he was because of how fast he drove, and they didn't like her riding with him.
Cotton's racing career began on the dirt tracks of the NASCAR Modified Division. His records here are that of legend.
And when Cotton pulled in the race, he was the one to beat, and usually he'd win. He must have won probably 200 or 300 modified races.
You'd have to consider him the king in modifieds. He was one of the best dirt drivers probably on a half mile I've ever seen. He won a lot of races.
He was very proud of his achievement at the beach. When he ran modifieds, he won it 2 years in a row, 1953 and 1954.
They started anywhere from 125 to 150 cars. That's a lot of cars to be on the beach.
He felt comfortable driving there. The turns would eat out. He grew up on dirt, so he was accustomed to that kind of thing and how to make the car go over it.
The pace lap of the Grand National Beach and Road Race.
Then in '57, I went into the Grand National deal and I won it. We did set the record that still stands.
Owens Pontiac is meeting the challenge, lapping the field at an average speed of 106 miles an hour, a new record. Owens Pontiac wins it.
He was very proud of that. He won the Harley Earl Trophy. That's the trophy that all the names of the Daytona 500 are etched on now.
Cotton Owens. He set the lap record here last year as a driver. Now he handles the wrenches and plans the strategy for his driver.
After retiring as a driver, Cotton conquered ownership. His driver was his closest friend, David Pearson. Together in the number 6, they won the 1966 Premier Series Championship.
We had a lot of fun. By him being a car owner, he wanted to be the best car owner. Whatever he done, he always wanted to be the best. We had a real good, close relationship.
I met Dave after World War II. I just liked the way he drove a race car because he drove more like I did.
My dad really kind of looked at David like another son. He was always impressed with David's talent.
He'd go to kidding each other or something, and he'd always bring up Richmond, you know. He really enjoyed beating me there.
I was having problems with Pearson, my driver. He was young, and he wanted to run flat wide open all the time, and I said, it's just not the way of winning races. I kept telling him that I could outrun him anytime I wanted to get back in the car. And so I Walked outside out there and told Pearson, I said, you pick whichever car you want tonight because I'm going to wear you out.
We had a deal, who was in front of the other one would pit first. I always kid him about that, and he just laugh about it. But I was leading the race, and when I got around to starting in the pits, he was already in there. I had to wait till they got through with him before I could pull in his pits. I got a lap down, and he won the race. But I still finished second. No, he cheated.
That sort of, I think, hurt Pearson a little bit too, you know. It surely did help Pearson along the way, knowing that his car owner done outrun him.
The following Sunday, you ain't never saw a man drive a race car in all your life like David Pearson.
Cotton he was real good in at fixing cars and making a lot of safety features in the cars.
He was the first one to put door bars in the side of the door. They start out with 2, then he wanted 3 door bars, and then NASCAR approved that. Then he put 4.
It wasn't just a win-lose situation. He was also concerned about his drivers as far as their safety.
Racing's best drove for Cotton, Earnhardt, Johnson, Andretti, Al Unser, Allison, and 1970 Southern 500 winner, Buddy Baker.
Cotton says, you know, this is the only big race I ever really, really wanted to win.
The checkered flag is out, and Buddy Baker takes it to win the 21st running of the Southern 500, and you think the Cotton Owens crew isn't happy.
He cared about the organization, and he cared about the racing, and he cared about the people. He was thankful to make a life doing something that he loved. Not many people can do that.
I was real thrilled when we voted him in the Hall of Fame. I called Cotton, and he had already had a stroke, and talked to his daughter, and I said, tell Cotton he's in the Hall of Fame. I said, we got him in. He died a few weeks later, knowing that he did make the Hall of Fame.
When he passed away there, it was a heartbreaker. He was just a great guy, and I'm proud enough to know that he was a friend and a real close friend.
His legacy would cover all aspects of the building the race cars, driving the race cars, and then fielding race cars for other drivers. And he always did it with class.
And now we look at the numbers for Cotton Owens. An amazing career for him. As a driver, 160 starts, 9 times he was a winner. But as an owner, 405 races, 38 of those ending in victory lane, and of course the crown jewel, winning the series championship in 1966 with David Pearson behind the wheel. Darrell Waltrip was inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame 1 year ago. He joins us now from Tennessee. DW, always good to have you with us. And let's talk about Cotton Owens. And what stood out to me in the piece is what Ned Jarrett said. Didn't matter if he was driving a race car or building one. He always did it with class.
I think that he really exemplifies true Hall of Fame material. Exactly what you said. He could build them, he could drive them, and he could own them. He's the full package. He's like a Junior Johnson. And those guys, and he did it with class. And he cared about his driver. He and Pearson were really, really close. He and Baker were really close. And, you know, Baker speaks so highly of Cotton.
Good stuff, Darrell. Hang tight. We've got more with you in a moment. When this Hall of Fame special continues, we introduce you to Herb Thomas. When he arrived at the track, he had only one thing on his mind. If you wanted a word to describe Herb Thomas, winner might be the one. 228 races, he won 48 times. That's the best win percentage in NASCAR history, and he was the first 2-time champion in NASCAR. Here's his Hall of Fame story.
Herb Thomas started running the Hudson Hornet, and boy, he won some races with the Hudson.
Herb Thomas was a winner, period.
There's the flag naming Herb Thomas the winner. And at the finish, number 92, Herb Thomas the winner.
He went there for purpose. He was on the racetrack to win.
If you look at the time they raced, the people they raced against, the way racing was at the time, for those 6 years, Herb Thomas was a Hall of Fame guy.
Herb Thomas grew up in the small farm town of Olivia, North Carolina, marrying his high school sweetheart, Helen. The two took on a new adventure and opened up a sawmill.
Daddy started the sawmill business. He bought one sawmill. He didn't have any experience because he hadn't worked in the sawmill business, but that was his profession. That was early 40s, and that continued 46 or 47 is when he got the bug for the racing.
While attending a modified event, Herb Thomas would make a comment that would change his life.
Went to Greensboro to watch modified races and said, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And that's how I got interested in racing.
Never afraid of obstacles, Herb began racing and competed during the first Premier Series sanctioned event of NASCAR.
And that led on in the 1950, and that's when he won his first race at Martinsville.
With the paycheck that came at Martinsville, Herb decided to stay in the sport. The exposure from the win helped him team up with Marshall Teague, who put Herb into a Hudson Hornet.
He saw something in this guy, Herb Thomas, that I couldn't see at the time. And it turned out Teague was right. Thomas was probably as good a driver as walked the earth at that time.
With a win at the famed track of Darlington, Herb was on the path to succeed.
His success started with the Hudson Hornet in 1951, when the Hudson became a powerful Grand National car.
He was very hard to beat when he was in his prime.
He didn't look like a race car driver. He didn't talk like a race car driver. But man, he had some kind of talent.
If I'm not mistaken, Herb, aren't you leading the NASCAR now as far as points go? Or yeah. Are you? Just what does that mean at the end of the year for a driver?
Well, it probably was $3,000 or $4,000 at the end of the year.
Well, it's worth having anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Herb, it's been nice having you with us, and I want to tell you right now, wish you the best of luck on this year's 500-mile Labor Day Classic.
Thanks. He wasn't all that much of a talker, but all he wanted was the money and the trophy.
By letting his driving do the talking, Herb Thomas won the championship in 1951 and 1953.
He was very focused on what he was doing, and he was very intense behind the wheel.
Herb Thomas was a guy that he's as good as you'll see. He and Smokey Yunick were unbeatable.
Thomas was a good driver, maybe the best at that particular time, and won a lot of races.
A distinguishing moment in Herb's career came at Darlington Raceway in 1955, when he decided to go with a manufacturer new to the sport, Chevrolet.
A man to beat, Herb Thomas, ready to qualify a new Chevrolet.
So we went on to Darlington, but it was the hare and the turtle. We knew we couldn't win the race by speed.
I said, if we're going to win that race, we're going to have to figure out how to whip with the tires. That's the only chance we've got.
The Chevrolets weren't the fastest, but had new endurance tires and had the driver.
What was so amazing about Herb was 1955, he was driving a 55 Chevrolet for Smokey Yunick, and they run the Southern 500 and won the race and never changed a tire on it.
Without having to change tires the entire race, the 92 car was able to get in front of his competitors and hold on to the lead, earning the first super speedway victory for Chevrolet.
The checker flag. Herb Thomas wins his third Southern 500. Thomas retires the winner's trophy in magnificent fashion, making this his third victory in the sixth running of the Southern 500.
We didn't win it with speed. We didn't win it with aerodynamic. We won it with tire. Matter of fact, we practiced, qualified, and won the race on the same set.
With the 55 Chevrolet, he got Chevrolet started into racing.
Certainly it was a historical moment for the sport of auto racing. For Chevrolet, when we look at what they have done since then, that has to be a real feather in the cap of Herb Thomas.
Thomas held the points lead late in the 1956 season, but a serious crash at Shelby, North Carolina, ruined his chances of a third championship.
Speedy and Herb Thomas got tangled up, and Herb got wrecked pretty bad, and all this got hurt pretty bad in that deal. And that's the only way Baker could have won the championship that year, that something happened to Herb.
It was sad to see him lose the championship in that way. He'd worked so hard to get to where he was and could have won that championship.
After the wreck, it took him a while to recuperate from that. And that's when he got into the trucking business. He still drove, you know. He still loved to drive.
Always able to hurdle a challenge, Herb accomplished a lot in his shortened career. He was the first owner-driver champion, the first three-time winner of the era's biggest event, Darlington Raceway, and the first to win 2 Premier Series championships, earning his spot in the NASCAR Hall of Fame.
Darrell Waltrip rejoins us now. And Darrell, what is the one thing a driver wants to do each and every week at the racetrack?
Win. First things first. Got to win the race.
And Herb Thomas was pretty good at that, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. He was a superstar, no question about it. You know, he's 34 years old. He won championships. He won races. I like this guy a lot. He would have fit right in with today's crowd with his focus and his single-mindedness and his ability to not only drive a car, but to own the car. He was the first owner driver to win a championship. Smart guy, really, really smart guy.
Darrell, good to have you with us on our Hall of Fame special, and we will see you soon from Daytona. Speed Week's just around the corner.
Can't wait, buddy.
When you think of sports in St. Louis, Missouri, you'd usually go to the Cardinals. However, it wasn't a bat and ball, but a race car that put Rusty Wallace on the map. His story is next.
Rusty Wallace has become the Winston Cup champion.
So good to have Kenny Wallace with us on our Hall of Fame special. Brother Rusty, a part of the 2013 class. The family must be proud.
I am so proud of my brother Rusty. It's incredible. I have goosebumps as I'm talking to you. But you know, when I look at Rusty and I compare it to modern era right now, you look at Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, they're out of the state of California. But when you look at Rusty, he's a trailblazer, you know, from the state of Missouri. And when I look back, I say, okay, Rusty made it okay for Kenny Schrader. Schrader said, hey, I want to do what Rusty's doing. And then I said, I want to do what my big brother's doing. Then my brother Mike. And nowadays you have Carl Edwards and Jamie McMurray that said, hey, Rusty, he was the risk taker out of the state of Missouri. And now, Adam, we're just following Rusty's suit.
The Midwest movement has definitely worked out. Rusty Wallace has some career numbers that are absolutely amazing. 706 starts, 55 wins. That's 9th on the all-time list. And yes, he did win the championship back in 1989. Now a look back at the career of Rusty Wallace.
He was born Russell William Wallace, but everybody knew him simply as Rusty.
Well, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and my dad owned a vacuum cleaner store along with his brother, and the hobby was always racing. So we go to the little local track around there called Lake Hill Speedway, and my brothers and I and all our friends would help Dad on his car, and that's kind of where it started. We'd work on vacuum cleaners during the day and sell them, and then we would race during the weekends and work on the car every single night all week long.
He grew up at Salem and Winchester and those places. His reputation was he was going to race and he was going to go fast, and he was going to do whatever he had to do to make it happen.
There's a kid out in back here. He said he really wants to meet you. Here's Rusty, you know, and he's got this full head of hair. It looked like an atomic bomb went off on top of his head. He was only like 16 or 17 years old, you know, and but he had a fire burning. I mean, he had a fire burning in his gut. He was going to go somewhere. You could tell that.
Don knew that I was kind of the St. Louis area racer, and he's the one that introduced me to Penske and got my career going.
It's a Roger Penske entered car that Rusty Wallace is driving, and there you see Rusty going down the front stretch there.
We decided to take a run at Atlanta, and I guess you'd have to say pretty good start. We finished second. That was a kickoff to what I think was a big part of his career.
That was all the stuff it took to finally get me that first break that came in 1984, driving for Cliff Stewart in that Gatorade car.
Wallace was one of NASCAR's first stars not from the South.
And there is Rusty Wallace. A nice run for this young man from St. Louis, Missouri.
He was brash, aggressive, and never met a camera he didn't like.
Big problem I've had for a long time, people say that I'm cocky.
He was cocky.
I think I can win soon. That's what I want to do. I don't go just to try to finish a race. I try to go.
Not obnoxiously cocky, but he was plenty confident.
When they see me coming in the mirror, I want them to say, oh, we got trouble now.
He could walk the walk. That's the difference.
Now, here we go. Rusty Wallace going ahead of Darrell Waltrip.
Every Sunday or every time he showed up at the racetrack, you know, we took the bridle off the thoroughbred.
Rusty Wallace wins his first Winston Cup race ever.
Wallace won 25 times on short tracks like Richmond, Martinsville, North Wilkesboro, and especially Bristol, where he took the checkered flag 9 times.
It looks like Rusty Wallace is going to win. Oh, another exciting Bristol finish.
He went back to his roots when we were at Bristol.
You know, it really became his secret weapon because the guy owned that joint.
In 1989, Wallace was poised to win his first Cup championship. Standing in his way was arch-rival Dale Earnhardt.
Championship is in our eyes. The only way they're going to beat me is if I break down. We don't plan on that.
I don't wish Rusty and all of them well while they're doing good, because we're fixing to put the pressure on them. They ain't going to be too happy.
While Earnhardt won the season's final race, it was Wallace who captured the championship and a place in NASCAR history.
Rusty Wallace has become the 1989 Winston Cup champion.
And it was my crowning moment in racing.
Along with his mentor, Don Miller, Wallace reunited with Roger Penske in 1991, this time as a co-owner as well as a driver.
When Roger came along, he helped beyond anyone's wildest imagination.
Me and Don Miller and Roger, we went up and saw Miller Brewing Company, and Miller wanted to sponsor our car. So we gave a pitch, and we got it. I got the sponsorship. That's how the whole thing restarted with Roger Penske, and the rest with Roger is history. We took off like gangbusters.
Teamed with Penske Racing, Wallace was a dominant force during the 1990s, winning 31 races in the decade.
And Rusty Wallace, the Missouri driver, will win here today.
We came back with Rusty in the early 90s, so we had the best driver at that point. He was the one that was, challenging Earnhardt and some of the great drivers.
And here comes Dale Earnhardt alongside Rusty Wallace saying, nice race and way to go.
I kept finding myself constantly involved with Dale Earnhardt Sr.
Rusty Wallace stands off of turn 4.
So much stuff happened with me and Dale Earnhardt Sr. It's crazy.
Rusty and Dale exchanging words down here.
He was my biggest rival, that's for sure.
Their rivalry reached its peak during the 1993 season. Wallace won 10 races, but still found himself chasing Earnhardt for the championship.
I remember the one thing that did bother me is when Earnhardt got in the back of him at Talladega.
Ernie Irvin wins and Rusty spins and gets airborne and flips wildly right at the start-finish line.
Dale Earnhardt Sr. thought he killed me that day. He was scared to death.
I went down and talked to Rusty. I got his gloves. He took his gloves off. He was talking to me while they were getting him out of the car. And I just hope he ain't hurt seriously or nothing, and I hate it happen.
That was probably one of the worst wrecks I ever had in my life. It knocked me out. It broke my wrist, blackened my eyes. That was a real setback. And I think I lost the championship because of that wreck. After I won my championship in '89, I thought they were going to be easy to win. I would have thought I would have won 5 or 6 championships easy. I would have never thought that '89 season would have been the only one I got.
Taking the checkered flag is Wallace. A great victory.
When Rusty Wallace retired in 2005, he was 8th all-time in Cup Series wins with 55, leaving no doubt he is truly one of NASCAR's greatest drivers.
He had all the pieces. He was a great driver. He was a tactician. And obviously, commercially, he was very savvy. And I think he was really a leader in that.
He's lived and breathed the sport. He's a good ambassador for the sport.
Rusty Wallace wanted to be something more than just another guy at the racetrack.
There's one thing that I'll never forget the rest of my life. This is a privilege to be able to drive in NASCAR. And I think that all drivers ought to realize the privilege that we've got bestowed upon us.
No question about it. Rusty Wallace has an amazing story to tell, and Kenny, you had a front row seat to watch it all unfold.
Well, you know, like I said, I'm awfully proud of my brother, but, you know, people come up to me today, whether it's Jeff Gordon or whether it's Joey Logano, and everybody's like, how do you get into NASCAR? Listen to this quick story. You know, we weren't born racers, even though my dad won a lot of racers. We worked at my uncle's janitorial business. I cleaned sewers. But here's what happened with Rusty. My dad, Russ Wallace, said, I need a $100 bill every Tuesday night. We delivered a local newspaper in Creve Coeur, Missouri. The newspaper was called the Community Press. We needed that $100 bill to give to my dad so we could live. We threw that newspaper, Rusty and Mike in the front seat, me in the back, shoving newspapers up to them so they could throw them. We went past this house every night. It was a white van. It said Sears Penske. Roger Penske had a line of tools at Sears, and we thought, man, IndyCar, Roger Penske. We pulled the newspaper truck over. Rusty finally had enough nerve to go knock on that door. It ended up being a guy named Charlie Chase, who became Rusty Wallace's best man in his wedding. Guess who Charlie knew? He knew Don Miller. So because of the newspaper route, we made it to NASCAR. That's how we made it. We didn't have a wealthy father. Rusty made it with hard work and being very nervy.
Rusty Wallace certainly deserves it. Congratulations to the entire family.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here, Kenny.
Oh, I'm so excited for Rusty. I can't take it.
Have fun with it, all right? For the second straight year, the Wood family has reason to celebrate at the Hall of Fame induction ceremony. After the break, one of the great minds of all time in NASCAR, Leonard Wood.
When people think of them, they think of them as a pair. Leonard was the mechanic.
Kyle Petty, who's on the voting panel for the NASCAR Hall of Fame, is with us now. And I think you and I both knew last year when Glenn Wood was voted into the Hall of Fame, Leonard was going to be right behind him, and certainly that's the case in 2013.
Yeah, it had to happen. Glenn as an owner, Leonard as the mechanic and as the master mechanic.
And when you talk about Leonard Wood, he was a true pioneer, cutting edge at that time in the sport of NASCAR.
My dad, he was a mechanic. I was about 6 or 7, and he was wanting me to tighten the cylinder heads. Of course, I just climbed up in the engine compartment. I'm pulling on this wrench, and he checked them to see if it was tight enough, and I remember he didn't move them. You know, I tightened them tight enough. I've just been so fascinated by engines, the way they sound. I do pride myself in knowing what a good engine's supposed to sound like.
When Leonard Wood first tuned a 1963 Ford Galaxy, the 28-year-old crew chief mechanic engineered the number 21 to run miles beyond the competition.
Race day, the 5th annual Daytona 500.
With the race leaders running on fumes, Leonard Wood's balance of horsepower and fuel economy earned Wood Brothers Racing NASCAR's biggest prize and their first of 5 Daytona 500s.
The checkered flag for Tiny Love.
It wasn't the first win for the single-car team from Stewart, Virginia. Glenn Wood was a talented driver who gained help from his youngest brother, who at 14 had turned a washing machine engine into a go-kart.
Scrap stuff is sort of what it was made out of. It was kind of amazing for him to make a thing like that early in life. I myself have set cars up probably for over 35 drivers, Glenn included. Lots of times he'd tell the drivers he'd hire them to just listen to me, it'd be all right.
Leonard and I were so close together, and he knew what I wanted, and I knew what they wanted.
I didn't work with nobody except Leonard, and he was so easy to work for.
I think every driver that's ever drove for him still feels like they're part of the Wood family.
There was nothing mechanical about Leonard's character. He put his full heart, faith, and attention into his relationships, whether with those in racing or at home with family.
my late wife, Betty. Nobody in this world could have supported me as much as she did. And then, of course, my daughter, Beth, the same way.
My dad always made us feel important and a part of his life, and we supported him because we loved it. I mean, my mom and I, we loved going to the races. We loved being all a part of it because it was just who we were.
Balancing life while mastering preparation of the total car were hallmarks of Leonard's genius.
He knew more about a car and bumper to bumper than anybody.
He was the best at setting the front end of any person I've ever been around.
Leonard built the heads and had the manifolds and the carburetions. That was his secret.
And the valve timing and the valve setting, he was super good.
I would call him a genius, definitely.
A genius at working on the car.
You went with your engine right, and then when you hit the track, you was adjusting on the handling. If you can make a quick pit stop, makes you take it easier on your car. Get a big advantage on the pit stop. You can drive the race like you want.
Car number 21 coming in to the most skilled pit crew in the world, probably the Wood brothers, Glenn and Leonard and Palatos, and all the others.
The nation's finest pit crew goes to work.
The most fabulous man in the world in a pit stop.
And they move with all the precision of a Swiss watch. On the drag out of pit row, Pearson wins it. Or maybe we should say the Wood brothers won it.
Leonard's approach to improving pit tools and techniques caught the attention of Ford Racing, who sought to improve Jimmy Clark's chance at winning the 1965 Indianapolis 500.
Clark's pit crew is famous. The Wood brothers, fastest on the Southern stock car circuit. Clark's refueling crew go to work. Like Clark, the Wood brothers are prepared.
The pit stop takes 17 seconds. Very short. Jimmy Clark crosses the finish line to become the victor of the 1965 Indianapolis 500.
Leonard collected 94 wins while shaping motorsports through innovating and inspiring moments. As Glenn's sons, Eddie and Len, took ownership of Wood Brothers Racing, they learned the spirit that fueled the family operation. Leonard remained active at the track and in the shop, witnessing 7 decades of the famous 21 in Victory Lane. Such a lasting imprint may have been the only thing the humble mechanic never envisioned.
I think he deserves every bit of praise that he can get.
If I was going to race today, I'd want Leonard Wood ahead of my car. He's even got a 4-wheel drive lawnmower.
Leonard thinks things through and sees things in his head that most people could never imagine or never dream.
Leonard Wood's one of the best mechanics our sport's ever seen. He's one of the people that laid the foundation to follow.
You walk in that door, you expect music because the Wood brothers are as good as it gets. They had a history of just being the best.
Having Leonard to join me in the Hall of Fame was one of the greatest feelings you could have. It was just great to have your brother beside of you.
So I was watching that piece, and I'm thinking to myself, he's a mechanical genius. And then you said it. He's a genius. It really is hard to put into perspective the mind he had for a race car at such an early time.
You know, he talks about, and we saw him talk about how he loved to hear those engines run. And I saw him there with Betty May and with Beth. He gave Betty May and Beth his heart. He gave that race car his soul. And when you drove that race car and drove for the Wood brothers, you felt like if you didn't win a race, you were letting down Leonard and Glenn and Eddie and everybody, Lynn, everybody up there. And it was amazing how attuned he was to the mechanical side of a car.
When you look at the numbers, for a man like Leonard Wood, they will absolutely blow you away. A statistical genius as well. 59 seasons, nearly 1,400 races, just shy of 100 wins. Their last victory coming in the 2011 Daytona 500 with Trevor Bayne behind the wheel. Buck Baker, oh, what a story he has to tell. He was so much more than a great race car driver. We have both sides of this NASCAR pioneer when our Hall of Fame special continues.
There was times when my father, as a matter of fact, he was the first car that ever spun me on the racetrack. So I'm down on the inside, and bam, he turns me around. So after the race, I was upset about it. I went over and I said, Dad, what in the world, what's wrong? I mean, why'd you run into me? And he said, as slow as you were running, you could surely look in the mirror and see me coming.
Buddy Baker talking about his late father, Buck, who is a member of the 2013 class of the NASCAR Hall of Fame. When you look at Buck Baker, here's a guy that was truly ahead of his time.
Way ahead of his time. And I think with Key Kafer and some of those guys, obviously he was. Those guys, just like Herb Thomas, Buck Baker won 3 Southern 500s. Now, that may not mean a lot to people today, but that was the Daytona 500 of the 50s. When you won at Darlington, that was a big deal. When you look at his total career, yeah, he kept hanging on and he kept driving. But in the heart of his career, there was nobody better than Buck Baker.
And now, the Hall of Fame story of Buck Baker.
From the beginning, NASCAR was built on character. And Buck Baker was just that, a character. With a reputation that included terms like tough and wild, Baker became famous for his on-track ability and infamous for antics off.
He drove a city bus, he drove for trailways, and there was a couple of times that he got in trouble. He was coming back from Columbia on the trailways, and he said, there's a big dance over in Lancaster. Who wants to go? And everybody held up their hand. So he just turned and went off and went to the dance. Well, they were hunting in the ditches and in the woods and everywhere else for the bus. They thought he'd run off the road. It wasn't a nice welcome when he got back with all the people there, but they seemed to enjoy it pretty well.
Well, it wasn't hard to get in jail. It was hell to get out, but it wasn't any problem for me to get in.
He's sort of a party person, you know. When he got in a race car, though, you never seen a better driver.
Buck Baker at the wheel of car number 87 pushes his throttle to the floor and zooms into the lead.
Baker is flying.
In 1949, Baker drove in NASCAR's first Premier Series race at Charlotte, North Carolina. 4 years later, at age 34, Buck committed to driving full-time, making him one of the early faces of NASCAR and a force in a growing sport.
When he had a winning car, he didn't bring it home second. He brought it home first.
It's Buck Baker blazing by the checkered flag, the winner.
Buck, he didn't seem to have to work as hard at it as a lot of other drivers to become very good. Just a natural-born race driver.
He could run on any racetrack. He could run a quarter mile, half a mile, or 3/4 mile, a mile. And he was great on every one of them.
Now, Buck on the racetrack, he was pretty aggressive. If you got in his way, he would move you.
They started me way back towards the end there one day. I told them I'd start on the damn backstretch if they wanted me to. I'd still gonna win the race.
Baker won 14 races in 1956, on the way to his first title. He repeated the feat a year later, becoming the first back-to-back champion in NASCAR's Premier Series.
He was one of the first heroes of NASCAR, almost like a movie star. It was a show, I'll say that.
Buck was always dressed good, especially when he didn't have his racing uniform on. He wanted to look good all the time.
He was slick. I don't think I ever saw his hair out of place, except when he got out of a race car, and there wasn't a comb very far away.
Baker apparently is combing his worries away.
He had that certain thing about him, the way the people just came to him, almost like a magnet, and they were lifelong fans of his.
Good person to the press, too, you know. But he was one of the toughest he was. I've never seen anybody run Darlington like he could.
Buck Baker in '89 shows magnificent form, trying to take the lead.
Baker knew just how to get around that racetrack with hard and slick as it was.
How about passing here? Where do you have to do it, Buck? You have to do it either on the straightaways or in 1 and 2 turns.
3 times he won the Southern 500. You didn't look and win the Southern 500. That was a benchmark.
That was one of my favorite tracks.
Buck Baker wheels his Dodge number 3 to the winner's circle where he's been twice before. Baker, a 45-year-old grandfather, has been racing almost 20 years.
The winning tradition Buck Baker established made him a racing legend. It was a custom he passed down to his oldest son, Buddy, who had the task of carrying the Baker name into NASCAR's next generation.
He was the Superman. I was just a kid hoping someday to even make a shadow on the racetrack anywhere close to what he'd done.
Buddy turned out to be one hell of a driver. Was always thrilled. It was hard for me to choke back my tears because the car would come down the straightaway and it'd sound different from anything on the racetrack. He could really run a race car.
The checkered flag, and Buddy Baker wins his first big race.
My dad was at the race, and he had made it all the way into the winner's circle. And that was the first time I ever saw a tear out of him. He was a proud pop. Wow, y'all better watch it. I'm not as tough as my dad. I started thinking about him, wow.
Buck Baker didn't officially retire from NASCAR until 1976, finishing his career with 46 victories. In 1980, he formed the Buck Baker Driving School to help evolve the sport he loved.
I don't know how many hundred are out there that he taught that are winning races. I know one of them was Jeff Gordon.
Jeff has been an inspiration to a lot of the other students that are here. I put him in different cars from the Bush type to the Winston Cup, and he just adapted.
He called me that afternoon. He said, this guy is going to be something special.
Baker a win!
Maybe a lot of the fans right today don't remember who he was, but I'm telling you, he was one of the greatest.
When you do it better than anybody else has ever did it, that's when you're going to enjoy the hero-type atmosphere like Baker lived in.
There wasn't one thing in his life that anybody could say, you know what, if... No, he did that.
My favorite line in the show from Buck Baker. It's easy getting into jail.
Yes.
It's hell getting out.
True statement.
And it was also hell beating him because you look at the numbers, 635 starts, 46 times. He got the big trophy, and of course he was the first ever two-time champion going back-to-back in NASCAR, doing so in 1956 and 1957. And now you have met the 5 men that will be inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in 2013. However, they're not the only names that will be called at the ceremony. The legendary voices that brought classic races into your living room like the 1979 500 are going in as well.
And the field goes to green in the Daytona 500 on the 16th lap.
And 41 cars come to life. For racing fans, this is such sweet thunder.
Cale just tucked in there. When will Yarborough make his move?
Donnie Allison throws the block. Cale hits him. He slides. Donnie Allison slides. He's thinking again. They're out of it.
Waltrip dives to the inside. Petty almost put him off in the grass.
Petty wins it.
There are certain events that you know are big because of the voices you hear calling the action. That's certainly the case for Ken Squire and Barney Hall, both going into the NASCAR Hall of Fame this year as a part of the award that carries their name. It's the Squire Hall Award for Media Excellence. 2 jewels when it comes to NASCAR broadcasting.
Perfect award, perfect recipients, obviously. My grandfather used to listen to Barney Hall on the radio and watch the race on TV. He didn't listen to Squire that much. He wasn't a big Squire fan. But I think Squire has meant so much to the sport. Barney Hall took the sport from the very beginning. Such an integral part. The 2 things about these guys is we can talk about all these other Hall of Fame guys, but nobody has more passion than Ken Squire and Barney Hall for the sport of stock car racing.
And both have been dedicated for many years. Thanks for watching our NASCAR Hall of Fame special. And we also want to thank Darrell Waltrip and Kenny Wallace for coming in, as well as Kyle Petty. I'm Adam Alexander. Enjoy the 2013 ceremony.